everything paranormal. Para-X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Merry meets and merry part, bright the cheeks and warm the heart. For tread the circle thrice about, to keep unwelcome spirits out. Abide within the law you must, in perfect love and perfect trust. Mind the threefold laws you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. These 8 words the read fulfill, and ye harm none, do what ye will.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. My guest tonight is Christopher Balzano, and we're going to talk about his upcoming book, Haunted Objects. Now, Chris is a writer, a researcher, a folklorist. He's been documenting and unexplained stuff since 1994. And he's been a figure in the paranormal world through his books, his articles, and the work he does as director for Massachusetts Paranormal Crossroads. And he's also the host of the podcast Tripping on Legends. Now, if you're listening in live, come join us over at Para-X at the chat room. And that's paraxradionetwork.com. And you can ask Chris questions or let us know maybe you've got a haunted object. So with a lot to cover, let's get started. So Chris, come down from that stuffy haunted attic and get some fresh air.
I live in Florida. You don't go in attics in Florida. What are you, crazy?
So we hear about people always going up into the attic and finding an old trunk. And when they open it, there's something creepy in it. And here in Southern California, we don't have attics or basements either, so we can't rummage through anything, but haunted objects can be found just about anywhere, aren't they?
Just about anywhere. I mean, obviously, the one of the lore of haunted objects is that finding that random dusty old thing that's in the basement when you move in, or the attic or something. But it's they really can, I'm horrible with names, I guess. I think I name things pretty witty, probably too witty sometimes. Mm-hmm. So the original title of the book was Stories of Ghosts on Your Shelf, right? Or just Ghosts on Your Shelf, I think was the name. And they were like, nope, that's not going to tell people what it is. We have to call it Haunted Objects, and we'll give you a subtitle. Mm-hmm. But it really, the concept of it when it first came out, in terms of like when we were working on it, was we don't just want to talk about these things that are sometimes cliche. I mean, even when we wrote the book, some of the stories we were getting from individuals, or even urban legends we were hearing, things like that. I was like, well, they're so overdone. But what about that thing that you picked up at a yard sale? Or what about that thing that traditionally maybe wasn't haunted in your house and then kind of becomes something else? And so we really wanted it to be like not just what you might uncover, in those attics and basements, because, I never went into my attic at my house, living in Massachusetts, living in New Hampshire, never went in one. Florida has crawl spaces, so haunted objects can really be just about anywhere.
And they don't need to be old antiques either, do they?
No, it all has to be, one of the things we focus on in the book is this idea of intent, right? And passion and love. And so it's one of those things where it can be something extremely new that is just the focus of something. It could be something especially, and this was what kind of appealed to me, and it appealed to my co-author, Tim Weisberg, because at that time he was a huge rummage sale and yard sale person. Was it something that's new to you? And maybe it's just a reminder of something from a few years ago, or it's something you just randomly pick up. But it is all about the intent of the object and not necessarily its age.
So when someone has a hunted object and they picked it up at a yard sale or a thrift shop or something hand-me-down, what are the odds of having an attachment?
Wow, 100%. I don't know. I mean, it's always tough to say odds because when you're picking something up at a yard sale, or when you're picking something up like at a rummage sale, or we went to a flea market that had a lot of, like half discarded objects a few weeks ago, right? It's kind of like something can be speaking to you, right? So to me, there's almost this kind of in the background kind of soft pulse of these objects want to find a home. These objects want to be somewhere, and so they speak to us, right? So if an object is haunted, it already has kind of like a glow to it, right? It has some kind of shimmer to it. And then the other part of that is if you're desiring it and you're drawn to it, it probably possesses something that has drawn other people to it. Your obsession is probably the obsession of other people, right? Like think of like Lord of the Rings and like my precious, right? Like this whole idea of some of these things were just naturally the subject of obsessions. And so if you're feeling a draw to it, maybe someone else felt a draw to it and they're still there.
Yeah, see, that's what I was thinking, because I was in a thrift shop one time before Christmas, and there was this huge globe, and it had a train that goes around it, and it had snow in the middle, and there was Santa Claus, and it was heavy as all hell. And they only wanted $5 for it. This was something that was really, whatever. And I couldn't not leave it there, because, I like the animation and the Santa and, the sparkle, I'm like a squirrel. Oh, look, it's shiny. But,
Right.
Yeah. So I brought it home, and I'm thinking, somebody come with it? And I just, I was just really, $5? Come on. This was not a $5 item. And so every Christmas I put it out, I wind it up, it does its thing. I've never had any problem. I assume that if I brought something home with it, they like being here or something. But, that was the first thing on my mind. I have to take it, but oh my God, it might have an attachment. So.
And how spooky is it to think that there could be a ghost and the ghost is too scared of you
that
to show
would
itself?
Probably be something that it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Or,
and
yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, so many of these objects, they seem to be triggered by your energy, right? Like we've always talked about the tumblers, how some people can experience nothing paranormal in a location, for example, and other people there's a ton of stuff going on, right? And so it's almost as if when the other people didn't experience anything, it's as if it discludes the experience that the people had. But it's all about tumblers. It's all about the right person at the right time in the right situation. So if you're drawn to a used object for some reason, right?
Yeah.
Or, and the other part of that, you were talking antiques or not antiques, but things that are passed down. If this necklace, for example, is somehow this metal that your grandfather wore around his chest is somehow a communication between the two of you. You used to sit in his lap and you used to hold it and he used to tell you a story about it or something like that. And it's a connection between the two of you. Then once again, that totally goes, it amps up the possibility of it being haunted because there's already a natural connection between the two of you and this is the conduit.
Yeah. Well, it's like they say when you go to get a deck of tarot cards, they'll call to you. You're just going to look around, they're going to call to you. Or even when you get a pentagram, for example, because they come in so many different shapes and sizes, you don't have to think about it. You will just go and gravitate to it. And so it's probably the same thing with antiques, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of like that scene, I know I'm dating myself with this, but that scene from Chaplin, when he walks into the costume shop and all of the objects that will eventually become his tramp character start to kind of glow and specifically call to him. It's meant to be, right? And those things kind of want you to find them. It's not necessarily, although we do have a few stories like this, where the thing specifically puts its way in your path for you to get it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's more of that you can hear it call, and whatever draw you might have or whatever psychic energy you might have or what is being drawn into the actual object. And that's when it's kind of also a little bit spooky. You know, I often get accused of my books not being scary enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say, well, if you read a book and you get scared, that's an unusual response to have, right? What I try to go for is something that will unsettle you or make you think or make you wonder about that thing that's right next to you or something like that. And I think a lot of these objects, when you think about that idea that they're calling to you or that they want to find you or that they seem to be landing on certain people over the course of years, that to me is extremely unsettling. That's not a jump scare. That's kind of one that makes you kind of lie in bed and be like, what exactly is out there? Like, I think it proves the paranormal even more than like the really, like, type of things,
Well, I also think when we're talking like that, there may be objects that somebody wants to pick up, and for some reason they decide at the last minute when they got close to it that they didn't want it. So they could, okay, you go home with me, but you're not going home with me, buddy. That kind of thing.
Yeah, I remember that a few years ago, I was really trying to work on meditating, and I was doing a great job with it. And through a series of hashtag follow the signs events, I ended up in a witch's shop. And I was speaking with this woman, and we had an amazing time. We actually, for a little bit, were doing a podcast together. And I was really drawn to her and her energy. And she was saying to me, you need to create an altar. Because, I was trying to get a little bit more witchy with it in hopes that I would be able to kind of use – you've known me long enough. I have no psychic tingle whatsoever. And so I think I'm just not meant to be a very good a witch in that way. So she was saying, you need to build an ancestral temple or an ancestral altar.
All right.
And so I was like, that makes sense because I had this skull, that was from Mexico, like a wooden skull that I was really being drawn to, and it was in where the altar was. I'm like, I'll bring it to the top. And then she went, and I've got something for you. And she went and she got these kind of replicas. They weren't actually crystal skulls, but it was something like it. And it was very alien looking. And I was immediately repulsed. Like, I wouldn't even grab it. I wouldn't even touch it. I was like, nope, not for me. And she was like so sure. The weird part about it is everything that she asked me to do and everything that she did actually blocked me psychically. And I think a lot of it sparked from that head. It was actually like she didn't read my energy right at all.
No.
And the objects from her shop that I brought in ended up having no juice for me. And actually I blame it on kind of severing this psychic path that I was on and this meditating path I was on. And it's taken me a while to try to get that back. So objects can have, like you're saying, the opposite effect too. You're just immediately drawn to it, or it seems to be the negative charge to your positive charge, and so the two things cancel each other out.
Yeah, like magnets.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got a question from the chat room. She says, how do you determine if an object is truly haunted or just has residual memories?
I don't draw a distinction between those two things. Like, I think that those are two things they're just two versions of the same coin. A haunted coin, as a matter of fact. And so we got, over the course of doing these stories, and we have both folklore and kind of classic stories that are mixed around these other ones we collected. I think some of them 100% there's something remaining of the last person on it. And so if you were going to ask me that same question about a haunting, my answer would be, does it seem to be intelligent? Does the haunting evolve? And if so, then it's the latter, right? And if it seems to just be, it causes some kind of activity, or, it seems to also just be residual, like the same way of a residual haunting, then it would definitely be, the first choice. So, but both of those to me are different types of haunted objects. So they're both kind of embraced by me.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's all about how how it interacts with you. Does there have to be is there an intelligence? Is there an interaction? Does it change or evolve, or does a certain situation make it come out differently? does the juice that you put into it activate it in a different way? If so, then it's more than just the residual of the person who once possessed it.
And sometimes it's hard to tell, like I'm with my thing, the globe, the Christmas globe. There may be somebody there and just not wanting to come out because it's okay, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of the stories that we covered, and this is kind of a weird distinction to make, but the objects had a tendency to move, right? Mm-hmm. And that to me is another sign of a more intelligent haunted object. Mm-hmm. Like it's trying to put itself different places. It's trying to scream out and get attention. And that was the evolution of a lot of these haunted object stories was they brought it in, they thought there was something unusual, and then all of a sudden it was here, and then it was there, and then it was someplace else, and people had to start acknowledging that there might be something weird going on. And so that was, to me, is a much better sign of intelligence.
Yeah, and the first year I put it out, it had a music box attached to it. So I cranked it, and it played, and, I was pretty sure that in the middle of the night it was going to start on me. But then you go, okay, well, it's a music box. It's something that could happen even without, any ghost doing it or anything else. But yeah, it's interesting and it's kind of fun at the same time.
And I think that as we were doing these stories, the residual type stories maybe didn't make it in as much because they were very personal, and they were not unusual for people, right? It was almost as if it felt like comforting, and they felt the energy of someone they knew. And so that also seemed to be another telltale sign of a residual versus an active one was if it was your grandmother's brooch, and when you wake up sometimes and you see her just standing by your bed or she's touching the brooch or something like that, that was a very personal one, and people didn't think it was unusual or good enough, like spooky enough or weird enough to connect with us and tell us about it because it was just a personal thing for them. And usually when there's that kind of intimacy to something, people tend to discard that they actually had a paranormal experience and think it's more of just like they're remembering things or they felt the need to see their grandmother and it wasn't really a ghost.
We've got another question.
Those silly fools.
The question from the chat room is, can you program something energetically to be sentient? Would that be a haunted object?
Like, can you put your intent into something? I mean, so the best example of something like that would probably be Robert the Doll. Which is a ridiculously famous case here in Florida. I haven't had a conversation with Robert lately, but I think he's pretty pissed off at Annabelle because he used to be the world famous haunted doll, and now she's kind of taken a lot of his shine from it. But the story of Robert the Doll is this little kid named Robert Eugene Otto gets the doll, and he immediately becomes obsessed with it. Right? He takes his own clothes. He puts his own clothes like on the doll. He restarts to make everybody refer to the doll as Robert, and he is now Gene. So he even takes away his own name and gives it to the doll. And there are many variations of why that is. Some people say that there was a curse put on the doll because Gene's father was having an affair with a housekeeper. She put a voodoo spell on it. And so that's what the thing is. But to me, the story has always felt like, when you strip the folklore away from it, has always felt like obsession. And I really feel that he made this walking, talking tulpa by becoming so obsessed with this doll. And he actually genuinely put a part of his essence in. So the story goes that he dresses the doll. He carries it everywhere around him, around Key West. And there's weird things start to happen in the house, like things start to fall and or things get destroyed. And he's in the room, but across the room, and the parents come in. He always says, Robert did it, which is like a famous saying in Key West. You can buy plenty of merchandise that says Robert did it on it. And then there were small fires were being set. And they'd say, "What?" He's like, "I didn't do it. Robert did it." And then it became a case of they would hear him talking to someone from another room, and it would be two clear, distinct voices. And so they reached this point where they felt they needed to lock the doll up in the attic, and people would report seeing the doll staring down at the window from them, at them. And I actually have a friend whose father took a picture like in the 1940s or something like that, of Robert looking down from the window, because that activity continued to occur all throughout Otto's life. He leaves, he goes to Europe to become a painter. He comes back with a wife. Him and his wife move into that house, and he becomes obsessed with the doll again and has to have it at the dinner table and has to have it next to the bed when they're sleeping. And she finally gets sick of it, and she makes him put it in the attic. Again, but this time under lock and key, and the doll keeps finding its way out and keeps staring down from the attic and running around the attic. They're hearing like a scampering, and all these different things. And until they finally, they after the Ottos die, after Gene and his wife die, they eventually move it into a museum, and now it's like a ridiculously famous haunted object that can curse you if you don't play by Robert's rules and do everything you're supposed to do. Then whatever weird mojo is going on about Robert follows you. And so there are people, and it's funny because there's an entire wall full of letters that cycle. Yeah. It's not even like it's an old thing. People are still being cursed by by Robert. And it's if you have to say hello to him when you first see him, you have to ask to take a picture, and then you have to thank him for the picture. You have to be polite when you're in there. You can't make fun of him or discredit the fact that Robert is a living, breathing thing. And then when you leave, you have to say goodbye. And if you don't do those things, you are cursed. Bad things will happen to you. You'll have bad luck. And so one of the distinctions we had to make in writing the book was, is there a difference between a cursed object and a haunted object? And that then became a fun thing to play around with as well.
Well, you think you're not psychic, but I have a question, and I'm talking about Robert the doll because, like I said, a lot of dolls, happen to be haunted and famous, and I mentioned, I'm thinking about Annabelle and Robert, and there's a lot of dolls that come with spooky baggage, but it's kind of the ghosts of the dolls' owners that are coming through their beloved dolls, usually, like you said. But I think Robert is different in the sense that he seems to have taken on a life of his own rather than his owners.
Yeah, it's funny because the stories of Robert the doll, I'm obsessed with Robert the doll in a completely different way, in that as a folklorist who has been, actually, let's put it this way. I went to Key West on my 10-year wedding anniversary, and because I was writing haunted objects at the time, I got the entire trip taken off my taxes. So I always make the joke, not very romantic, and we got divorced right after that, so Robert put a curse on me, right? But the actual, I have a very, very stand apart, observe relationship with Robert. And I've seen, I saw him the very first time I saw him was when he left Key West for the one and only time, when he was out up in St. Pete. And he was, for the most part, I would say disrespected by the people who were running the convention. And then those people immediately had bad luck that led to me being given a book to write. So it was good for me, but bad for them, right? But I have watched the stories of Robert change as the people who are in charge of him have wanted things to work out for themselves. So the first thing you have to think about with Robert is none of the early stuff that has to do with Robert has to do with curses, right? Like it all has to do with this weird activity about Robert wanting to be known and acknowledged and not kept up in the attic. Yes, there are the things, but they were kind of childish, like the things dropping and the things being misplaced. But most of the stories just had to do with Robert didn't want to hang out in the attic, right? Like Robert wanted to be known. But now it's like the focus of this dark curse. And of course, the draw of that is for you to go into the room and play with that curse, right? Like for you to, so it's very much marketing, you know?
Yeah.
And then last year around this time, we were hit with Hurricane Ian.
Yeah.
And we had to, you know, my area was hit very hard. That was the bad news. The good news is I had a lot of events scheduled outside, like near the Ocala National Forest, which is like 4 hours from me. But that's what my latest book was about, right? So I had scheduled a lot of events, and it was far enough away that there was like no damage in that area, really. And so my kids and I hit the road because I didn't have school, they didn't have school, the schools were destroyed, right? So we hit the road, and I remember one night we were sitting up watching TV in the hotel room, and they had that shock jock special on Robert. And we were sitting there, and it was hilarious because they had Mark Muncy, who I consider a friend, and he was one of the talking heads. And then they had Jeff Belanger, who obviously is, you know, one of my very good friends, and he was one of the talking heads. And so we're sitting there, and I'm texting both of them back and forth, and my kids are laughing hysterically, going like, what are they talking about? Like, this has nothing to do with Robert. What is this story? Even my kids know the story because, you know, we talk about it so much. And it was one, and then you look at it and it was like, oh, Robert had just been sold, like where he stays, like there was a new tour. The old tour was no longer going through. It was a completely new company. And so they felt the need to add a little bit more to the story because now they're charging for the Robert experience. And you can go into the room by yourself for like 45 minutes for like $200, right? And so they had to rejuvenate. They had to put like another twist to it. And I'm like, I've been doing Robert research for like 20 years, and I never heard anything about an illegitimate child dying of yellow fever, and the father wouldn't help. And so what's actually inside Robert is the daughter of his father's dead illegitimate daughter, right?
Oh, boy.
But it needed to change. And if you didn't know, it made complete sense because that's a story that we can be familiar with, that we can connect to. So it's interesting as a folklorist just to sit back. And Robert was one of the chapters that I felt I needed to update when we redid the book, because I wanted to add those new like angles to Robert, and also the fact that, you know, he seems to be whatever is popular in the paranormal, it's going to go through Robert and you're going to find it.
Yeah. And I don't know, everybody knows this, but I don't know, but I supposedly have an EVP of Robert.
Oh, really?
I was interviewing somebody at the place, but it was years ago, a woman, and she swore she was alone, and then, well, I'll send it to you. You can listen to it. But everybody's like, my producer at the time, when he went through the show, he called me up like 7 o'clock in the morning, the next morning. You got to hear this. I had to isolate this, and he was freaking out. It scared the hell out of him, and he's not like a guy that gets too scared.
Right.
So, you know, the story goes, but we'll talk about that later.
I would be interested to know what the voice sounded like. Now, not necessarily what the voice was saying, because I don't trust haunted dolls to give me, you know, information. But I would, because I've always been interested, like, is it Otto? Is it another force? Is it his grandfather? Is it, I mean, it's not as if Key West doesn't have a ghost on every corner. Was it something else that attached itself to it? Or was, you know, the artistic ideals and the artistic mindset of Otto, did he just invent a really creative story and stuck with it for years? Yeah,
well, when we get off the air, I will send it to you and you can listen and make your own suggestions. Cool. What do you thought? Yeah, but it is very cool. You know, the book, we got about a minute before a break, but I just want to say that the book is full of stories about haunted objects, and I like the way you put the chapters together, like the ghosts you wear, haunting around the house, beware of what's passed down, and the like. And all these creepy stories are enough to make a skeptic kind of raise an eyebrow, I think. You know, as you said, you like to make people think. And some of these are thinkable, you know, others are laughable, like the and I'm not going to go into it, but the butter dish that keeps disappearing. You know, who wants to hunt a butter dish? Well, you know, people are crazy. But
I don't know. My grandmother was crazy obsessed with her butter dish.
Well, see,
I think that woman said the word butter dish 5 or 6 times a day. I mean, I don't say my kids' names 5 or 6 times a day, but she was always talking about it. So it's once again, I think the butter dish is interesting because it is this. Everyone's around the table, and the last thing you do is you take out a butter dish, and it completes the setup for dinner, which is where people come together, which is where that mojo, gets ignited. If or if you were at my house growing up, where all that negative energy and all of that, oh crap, am I gonna mess up during dinner and have my food taken away? I need my food. So I think that that even though it seems like it's a silly object, and a lot of those objects were the alarm clock, right?
Yeah,
and the although Tim wouldn't say so, but the flamingo that was haunted, the pink flamingo.
Yeah.
These are sparks and touchstones of moments and relationships, and maybe that's more important than something creepy or something like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to take a short break, so everybody at home, why don't you take a quick look around and see, maybe you've overlooked some strange goings on in your house, and maybe this will make them come out and say hello to you. Anyway, we'll be back in 2 minutes.
There's more Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks right after these important messages.
I was in the hospital with my son for 18 months.
When he got injured, I wasn't prepared, but I knew I had to be strong.
When I was told about John's injury, I was in complete shock. I just remember rushing into his room and giving him a big hug and letting him know I was there.
These veterans and families are just a few of the heroes we serve at Homes for Our Troops. For thousands of severely injured veterans, everyday life is filled with barriers.
It was really the little things throughout the house. Counters that you can't roll up to. I had to drag my wheelchair down steps.
I want to help, but he is so determined.
At Homes for Our Troops, we build specially adapted custom homes with features like wheelchair access, roll-in showers, and automatic door openers that allow them to function independently and focus on their recovery and family.
This house is freedom. It's hope. It's a new beginning.
This house has given me my family back.
To learn more, visit hfotusa.org.
Throughout time, events have occurred that have shaped human history. Spirit voices from the past have many stories to tell, and for the past several years, channelers Barry and Connie Strom have been conducting live channeling sessions and relaying those stories and messages from those on the other side. We invite you to tune in to Barry and Connie's new show, Channeling History, on the Para X Radio Network, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, as they relay the messages of those voices from the past, the ones who have witnessed history firsthand, and those who have made history themselves.
Hey everyone, it's Marla. If you like tonight's episode of Stirring the Cauldron and the archive podcast as well, take a look at the show's YouTube channel and check out the dozens of shows that are there just waiting to be heard. New shows are added each week, and while you're there, why not subscribe? It's free. And if you click on that tiny little bell icon at the top of the page, you'll be notified when new shows are available. Just go to youtube.com and then type in Stirring the Cauldron Para X and the link will appear. Just like magic.
Welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Once again, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
I swear my microphone it's haunted every time. Anyway, we're back with my guest Christopher Balzano, and we're talking about his book Haunted Objects: Stories of Ghosts on Your Shelf. Here's the obvious, very, very quick question: do you have any haunted object at your house?
I don't. I am the most boring person in the paranormal. I didn't grow up with any weird things that happened I never had a ghost in my house. I never saw anything or experienced anything really till college, except for I look back sometimes and I say, oh, wait a minute. I've had more psychic things, like as if someone's trying to get me to do something, and so they put signs there for me. But to be honest with you, most things don't follow me home when I go legend tripping. Things don't generally tend to come into my possession or be possessed. Now, the difference of this is that I live with two kids that I think have a lot of psychic juice. And so there's, it's not a story that's in the book, but there was this person, I wish I could remember her name right now to give her a shout out, but she was a guest on Spooky South Coast when I was booking guests, and she sent me a copy of her book, and it was all about how to talk to kids about ghosts, right? And so it's kind of this picture book, and then, it's made for younger children and things like that, like don't discredit what they're seeing. And for a while, that book would pop up on my daughter's bed when we were going out to do a legend trip. And I was surprising them with it too. So it wasn't even like, it was one of those things where she had pulled the book out of someplace, and, she's not a liar to me. But, I'd be like, oh, guess what? Today we're going to be doing a legend trip. I'm going to take you guys out to this place. And she was like, oh, is that why you put the book on my bed? And this book would then disappear in between those times. So we couldn't find it. If you ask me now, I don't know where it is. It just seems to pop up whenever there's something paranormal going on with my daughter. So I've had those kind of experiences. Now, that doesn't mean I haven't come into contact with them. For me, the most famous cursed object, I would say, so it's a little bit more than that, is when I took a piece of bark from the devil's tree in Florida. And you're not supposed to. It's the location of two of the murders of Florida's most prolific serial killer, Gerard Schaefer. And this tree is kind of the focus of a lot of negative energy. Like, it's my belief Schaefer found haunted places because he was drawn to the darkness of some of them. And so a lot of his murders, the place I feel is haunted because he chose a haunted place, or he was drawn to a haunted place. The tree is indestructible, right? You can't chop it down. People try to chop it down, their axes break. They try to buzzsaw it down, the chain breaks. They've tried to burn it, and the fire either goes out or jumps onto them. So it has this mystique, and whatever you do, you're not supposed to bring the bark from the tree. And we took a little bit of the bark, right? We kind of tempted fate, and immediately we let something into our lives that was very dark. And we started having the same, afterwards, even though I got rid of the bark almost immediately because it was causing my car to break down. And so we ditched the bark, but even just afterwards, having taken it from the devil's tree, she started to have a lot of paranormal experiences at her house, my co-host, and then we would have these horrible nightmares that were exactly the same. And we would get up and we would write the thing down, and we would compare notes, and it was the same exact stuff, right? And it's funny because whenever I do events and I'm talking about the devil's tree, I always go outside at the event and I pull off some bark, or I pick up bark from the ground, and I always offer it. I tell them half the story. I don't tell them I got rid of it, and I say, this is the piece of bark. Who wants it? And no one is ever willing to pick it up, oddly enough. No one's ever willing to even touch it. So that's about as close as my experience gets. But there are a few moments in the book that are documented where haunted objects came into my possession, and then, which is really happens with a lot of these objects. Either they stop conducting juice, but more often than not, they just find a way to disappear from your life.
Yeah. Okay, we got another question that's kind of similar to what we're sort of talking about. She said, I received a Native American arrowhead as a gift. It was found on this person's property. I feel it has an attachment, and I'm not comfortable with it. Do you think if I returned it to the property, would the object be at rest then?
100%. That is a classic case, right? Of this removing, especially it seems for us, Native American objects. And now, traditionally I always say like, oh, well, it's, kind of your guilt from having disrupted something. Like when you hear a Native American story, like they're usually a reflection of our guilt. And so something like that was given to you, right? And it wasn't given to you. They weren't like destroying the land to get it. They found it, they gave it to you. But oftentimes those kinds of objects have an attachment to them, right? Especially considering what they were used for, how it might have been connected to the person itself, like in their life. I would highly suggest putting it back.
Yeah, I would too. I mean, anything.
And the weird thing is, a lot of times with these objects, it's really weird. When people have either given the object back or something like that, good luck tends to follow them afterwards, almost as if they've put the world back in order and some force from beyond, maybe even like the spirits themselves, grant them good luck.
Thank you. Yeah.
There's a it's like a thank you. So there's a follow-up, there's the Uncle Webb's tools story, which everyone seems to like in that book, where there was a conflict between a father and a son, right? Like in life, they just never saw eye to eye. The father wanted the son to go in one direction. He went in a totally different direction. And when he died, he passed his tools, which were kind of like a lot of focus of his energy, down to his son. And for his son, it was a focus of negative energy because his father spent more time with the tools than he spent with him in life, right? Because they were very different people. And so he allowed his cousin to have the tools. And they immediately, these tools started to appear around the house. Weird activity started to happen, and he was drawn to, I'm not going to tell the whole story because I want people to buy the book, but ultimately, spoilers, he gives the tools back. And after I wrote that story and it was published, because we're talking, this book is like 12 years old now, the first edition, he got in touch with me. The cousin got in touch with me and said, it's really weird. I gave them back. It strengthened the relationship with my cousin, but for some reason I just had a string of really good luck after that. And these things like I got a new job and I got a new girlfriend, and I've always attributed to like some kind of positive energy for having like done something good and set the universe right.
Yeah. I'm jumping around a little bit because, I want to get a lot in, but you do have, you have a chapter called Don't Sit There. Now, at one point that reminded me of a chair that I saw. It was in the home of my late friend Kenny Kingston. That was the guy that was a psychic to the stars for Marilyn Monroe and all those people. And at some point, there was maybe not too well known now, but Clifton Webb was an actor way back when, Mr. Belvedere and all that. Yeah. And he was a friend of Kenny's, and he gave Kenny an old throne-like chair. And so Kenny took it home and he put it in, the place of honor in his den, and he put velvet ropes around it. And I was in there one day and I thought, well, why do you have the velvet ropes? And he said that the chair is kind of haunted in a way that when they do seances in the house, the chair moves during seances. But more interesting than that was that apparently, what's his name, Clifton Webb, didn't like women. And if any woman tried to sit in the chair, and many tried, they were forcefully ejected from it. Now that's really cool.
Oh, wow.
I didn't get near it. I just looked at it and, saluted. But but would you sit in a chair that somebody said, would give you bad luck or was haunted or whatever?
So when we published the book, this Hollywood producing company read the book. They liked the idea. I'm not quite sure. I don't think Haunted Collector was on yet. And they flew me back up to Massachusetts so that Tim and I could make a pilot for this haunted objects show. And one of the cases that we immediately wanted to do was this guy who was obsessed with a chair. And it was in this storage unit because he couldn't have it even in his house anymore, right? Like for weeks he had obsessed walking by, seeing it in a window. I'm reading Needful Things right now. It reminds me of that, right?
I love that book.
Yeah, it's really good. Although I'm reading it and I'm almost finished it, and I'm like, you know what? I think the movie was better. I liked the movie. Anyway.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so I very rarely say that, but anyway. So and then finally he had enough money and he purchased it. It was way too expensive, and then he just became obsessed with sitting in it, and it was very much like a drug addict to a drug. I mean, he couldn't stop thinking about it. It became no one else could sit in it. And so he had put it in a storage, it wasn't a storage unit. It was like a business that had closed. And so he kept the chair in. Mm-hmm. And we tried to contact him all day about it, about getting into this closed business to examine the chair and to do things. And, he finally was like, I'll unlock the door, but I'm not coming in. Mm-hmm. And so we went in and we conducted all these different things, and we were making it very, very Hollywoody. I even contacted my old roommate, who is an expert in antiques, and got her opinion on the chair. Like, we were doing all these interesting things, and we noticed that he had kind of crept into the building, and he kept looking like around the corner and then like putting his head. Like it was just very weird. The man was either insane or he was really in the throes of this obsession about the chair. And then part of what we were doing is, well, we've got to sit in the chair. Like if the chair belongs to him, and he said that people would either get really, really cold or really, really hot and they'd want to get out of the chair. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, I've got to sit in the chair, I mean, that's the kind of one of those things, because, even though it makes complete sense, right? Like the fact that objects can somehow become haunted or become the focus of the dead to the living, it makes sense to us. There's still that part of us that doesn't want to believe it, because we have a ton of those types of things in our house, right? Mm-hmm. And so we feel the need to tempt it, right? When the first time I saw Robert, every person, when I was in St. Pete, I was near it. I didn't have any idea what he was whatsoever. And all day people kept asking me to take a picture without saying please. Oh. Little did they know they were cursing me, those jerks, right? But they wanted to have that validation of, okay, now ask to take the picture, right? And so I think that we want to tempt those kinds of things, right? Like we want to experience it. And then I think there's also that silly, foolish part of us that thinks, well, I can do something with the object, and then I don't have it anymore. As if not being in possession of the haunted object because it's someone else's and you're just doing a ritual that you're supposed to do with it means that it won't follow you home, right? Or it won't make you a target for something else. So there's a little bit of haunted object hubris going on with people when they interact with these kinds of things. And I also think it's the same kind of, because there's a whole chapter about Ouija boards and spirit boards. It's that whole same thing of like, well, I'm going to do it because I don't believe this. And then weird things happen, and then they come and want me to help them with it.
Yeah, well, they do. Well, some of you fix it. Either they don't believe anything's going to happen, or they know somebody that can fix it, and sometimes it doesn't work. Yeah, that's kind of.
I mean, what power do I have? Like, I'm going to send them to Marla Brooks. At least she's got the witch thing going on. I can't help you.
Yeah, well, sometimes I couldn't help with that either at that point.
Right.
But, I mean, there are people that have it, like my friend Scott Michaels, dearly departed tours. He has a whole museum full of these things. He's got Jane Mansfield's death car. He's got a fireplace bricks where the body of Sharon Tate was found at the Manson murders. He's got pieces of John Denver's plane that crashed. I mean, he's got all these things. And he had them in his house. And things started to go a little wonky. And so he called me and a friend of ours, a medium, and he says, you guys got to help, because somebody got slapped in the bed, and I mean, it's bad. So he finally decided to get rid of all that stuff. But he had so many things that were creepy stuff that I wouldn't, I mean, I walked in there because I just, anywhere I got near any of those things, I got the creeps. And maybe it was my imagination, but it still was very uncomfortable. So, people that keep stuff like that, I mean, that's why he ended up making a museum, out of the house.
It's so in the book I talk about what happened when a psychic and witch friend of mine, Jackie Barrett, inherited, or like she didn't inherit because he wasn't dead at the time, but she became the trustee of all of Ronnie DeFeo's personal correspondence and his any personal objects he still had.
Yeah,
and it's my favorite story probably in the book, because it's like 4 different haunted objects going on, right? Like there's a lot of things going on, and she was asking me like, what's going on here? And I'm like, what are you talking about? You're the person who sees dead people. What can I do to help you? And ultimately she wanted to write a book, which she ends up writing, called The Devil You Know. And she wanted me to work with her writing the book. And just that connection, Ronnie DeFeo or some dark force around him started to mess with my house. And so, when people say, what is the most intense paranormal experience you ever had? It was when, now keep in mind, I'm just debating whether or not to write the book, right? I don't have any of the objects. It's just, the potential for me to get them. And I would see this shadow man in my house. And I would, and there's a lot of different elements going on with the story, but the last night it was kind of like, okay, maybe I will, and the shadow man appeared at the foot of my bed, and it wasn't sleep paralysis. I could completely move. He was just standing there at the foot of my bed, staring at me, no features, and then kind of just turns and leaves my room. And moments later, I hear my daughter, who's a baby at this time, screaming. And I was like, that's it. I'm, nope, not going to write the book. Nope. And that has followed us to the point that Kim and I for years would not even say the word Amityville, because whenever we did, if we were on an interview, hosts like you would always want to talk about it, and we'd start talking about it and the line would go dead.
Yeah.
I recently did it just a few years ago. Someone was asking about the story, and I could not get through the story. I was coughing. It was just like the priest in the movie, right? Like I couldn't get things out. And so, I've had a few different experiences like that. I remember before R. Gary Patterson died, who is the rock and roll historian, right? And he has, so if you know what like the 27 curses, he's the first person to put that forward. He was a really good friend, and when he passed, it was horrible. But in the end days before he passed away, he had taken dirt from the crossroads where Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil. And he had this, right? And he also had something, and this is what made me think of him. He also had something that was from Buddy Holly that was then handed down to Peggy Sue. And then Peggy Sue had given it to R. Gary Patterson because, he had done a lot of the stories having to do with that whole incident and everything like that. And again, he was having these weird experiences in his house, and he wanted me to explain them and then take, and it always was, and then can you take the object? And so those are like, a few of these experiences where it's like these objects never even made it into my house, but they seem to have an impact on what was going on.
That's not impossible.
No, it's I always wonder what happened to, because he said he wanted me to have that dirt. So he passed away, but I never got the dirt, unfortunately. So.
Well, you weren't supposed to have it then, right?
Yes, and anyone who knows me knows that I'm obsessed with the Crossroads curse and kind of the weird things that have followed the story of Robert Johnson, for almost 100 years now. And and so that dirt was something special. And actually that Tim Weisberg and I we're both good friends, collectively, kind of like we were a group with R. Gary Patterson. And he was part of the reason why we wanted to do another Haunted Objects book. Because we were like, that's a really good story. And we've now have more stories that are like that in the last 15 years that would make, like, we've got enough for another book. And especially if we ask other people. And at the time that we were debating that, the rights to the book came back to us. And so we're like, you know what? There is, the book itself failed, right? Like, for the most part, it failed. And I get to this in the introduction to the new one. Back when this book came out, like, if we're experiencing the paranormal in a very, it's part of our life, we don't notice these things. But the non-paranormal people's opinion on ghosts has changed dramatically in the last 15 years. And when the book came out, people were about the shows, and they were about evidence, and they were about scientific stuff. And so they didn't like the fact that the book has folklore, like you were talking about Jane Mansfield's car. We talk about, Dean's car and the first Franz Ferdinand limo. They were like, give us either a ghost story or give us an urban legend book. They didn't like the mixing of the two because there was this very galvanizing thing in the paranormal at that time because of the TV shows, right? Like, the only good ghost is a ghost that you can go out and hunt.
Right.
So it's interesting to see that the interest in the book is different because people's ideas about the paranormal have changed as well.
Yeah, and it's a good thing. In a way.
I think it is. It's what I do, so I'm glad.
Well, yeah, but see, you know what you're doing. A lot of people just do it because they've seen it on TV and think they know what to do. And that kind of gives people that are doing it real a bad name when things go wrong.
Yeah, and then also the idea of, like, I embrace both the folklore aspects of a haunting as well as the actual haunting itself. And there have been times when I've been doing this where people don't want that. Like, no, I don't want the backstory, or I don't want, like, this kind of, like, stylized version of the story.
Yeah.
What did you get for, did you get an EVP? Did you get this? Did you get this? And I'm like, all right, does it really matter?
Yeah.
And they would say yes. They would say, yes, it does matter. And I'm like, okay, well then, I'm not the man for you.
I like backstory. I think it's very helpful in a lot of ways. But what isn't helpful is that we're running out of time. So how about giving out your website or wherever people can find you and, your podcast? Talk.
Sure. The podcast is called Tripping on Legends. You can get it anywhere that you get podcasts, right? It's even on Spotify now. So it's Tripping on Legends. And then the social media, the best place to go is Facebook because everything ends up on Facebook. So it's facebook.com/trippingonlegends. The website is trippingonlegends.com. And of course, any other social media, you can just type my name and you're going to find, creepy pictures of me. And by creepy, I just mean regular pictures of me that I think are creepy.
All right. I'm not going there.
I know that's the thing between us, but no one else gets it. But yes, I have a weird thing about pictures of myself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for coming in and sharing your book, and let's thank everybody for listening in as well. And until next time,
thank you very much for having me, Marla.
Anytime. Everybody, blessed be, and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another great guest and more fun. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2009.
You have been listening to the Para X Radio Network.